Hello and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold, and this week I'm joined by a special guest as our co-host, Scott Bentley from Locked On Tigers. Thanks for joining me, not just for a segment, but for the full show.
Yeah, I appreciate you reaching out. This is twice in like 3 or 4 weeks, so it's nice to be back.
I think we'll keep it going, man. We'll see about all that. But we have a lot to discuss and a lot about what happened on the field, a lot about what happened off the field. On the field, it was a 4-2 record for the Tigers this week, 3-0 versus the Arizona Diamondbacks at Comerica Park, 1-2 versus the Philadelphia Phillies at Citizens Bank Park. First and foremost, you've got to tip your cap to the Tigers offense for bouncing back in that Diamondback series. They had one win in 13 games going into their series finale against the Blue Jays. And in those 13 games, they scored just 33 runs. So it was 33 runs, 13 games, and only one win. And then from the Blue Jays series finale through the Diamondback series, the Tigers won 4 games in a row and scored 34 runs. So again, 33 runs with a 1-12 record across 13 games, and then 34 runs with a 4-0 record across 4 games. That's quite the turnaround from an offense that really needed it. And I know they lost 2 games to the Phillies, but I thought the at-bats were decent against Ranger Suarez in the first game. And then you're not going to complain against about 9 hits off Zach Wheeler in the second game. And then obviously Christopher Sanchez shut them down. And that wasn't even close. But overall, I think the offense is trending up from where it was this time last week. And that really should benefit the Tigers with series coming up against the Minnesota Twins, Los Angeles Angels, Chicago White Sox, and then again, the Minnesota Twins. Those are the next 4 series. All 3 of those teams rank in the bottom 15 in ERA this season, including the Angels at 25th in MLB and the Twins at 22nd in MLB. So offense definitely seems to be on the up and up. And I think that's a big thing for the Tigers moving forward.
Yeah, 100%. I think the point you made about the Phillies series is a great one, right? Everyone's going to focus on the sweep, obviously, against Arizona. And there was some really crooked numbers in that series, which is great to see. But, Philly that's one of the best rosters in baseball, especially post deadline, right? And we saw 3 of what legitimately have been the better pitchers in the National League in this series. And the fact that they went 4 runs, 7 runs, and then obviously Sunday. But, if that happened at any point in the weekend, as long as it was a one-off, you were just going to tip your cap and be like, okay, that's, Sanchez, that's Wheeler, that's Suarez, whatever. So I think that the fact that it carried through and it wasn't just they pumped the Diamondbacks, the awful pitching staff in Arizona, and then went back to their old ways. The fact that I think it kind of carried through is a really big deal. I agree with you. I think it's trending up.
And even beyond that, just for the team as a whole, right? You talked about them coming off of that 13-game stretch where they had 12 losses. And then you see what they did against the Phillies. Yes, they lost 2 of 3, but at the same time, Friday's game, they lost 5-4. Sunday's game, they lost 2-0, right? You lose by 1 run and you lose by 2 runs. It's not like they were smoked by the Phillies in any of those games, right? And then they won 7-5 in their game on Saturday. So when you look at what they did against the Phillies, one of the best teams in all of baseball, and right up there with the Tigers as well, right? I mean, these are 2 of the big dogs in baseball right now going at it. And I thought the Tigers did a really good job of playing their brand of baseball. I thought for the most part, they played clean. I know obviously in Friday's game, there were some mistakes that came back to bite them, but for the most part, I feel like they played clean. They weren't playing sloppy and they easily could have swept the Phillies, right? 1 or 2 hits go their way on Sunday. Maybe that error by Brendan Hanafy, if that doesn't happen on Friday, you could be looking at a serious sweep of the Phillies. So I think that's a good sign for the team moving forward. But bad news of the week, Reese Olson out for the regular season and maybe the postseason with a right shoulder strain. He finished the 2025 regular season with a 3.15 ERA, 25 walks and 65 strikeouts across 68 2/3 innings in 13 starts. When healthy and effective, he has proven to be the Tigers' number 2 starter behind Tarik Skubal. He's shown that he's capable of pitching to that caliber, but now he's hurt. He made his final start July 24th against the Blue Jays. And then he completed a bullpen session on July 26th. He reported right shoulder discomfort. They go for an MRI. The MRI reveals it's a shoulder strain. Earlier in 2025, Reese Olson missed nearly 2 months with a right ring finger inflammation. And now he's going to be down at least 2 months with a shoulder strain. So in a 6-month season, he's going to be down for 4 months. He also missed nearly 3 months with a right shoulder strain in 2024. So this right shoulder injury is a recurring issue. It's definitely something to monitor moving forward. Hopefully there's no surgery and he's just able to rehab it as usual, return for the postseason. But 2 shoulder injuries in 2 years, that's normally not a recipe for positive news. And it sucks to see him injured again. But for the good news of the week, we got Chris Paddock on Wednesday against the Diamondbacks and Charlie Morton on Sunday against the Phillies. Scott, you're nodding your head already like, here we go, baby. Because who had Chris Paddock and Charlie Morton coming to the Tigers on their trade deadline bingo card? And then beyond that, like not only joining the Tigers, but then shoving in their Tiger debuts. Chris Paddock pitched Wednesday in a 7-2 win against the Diamondbacks. 1 run on 3 hits and 0 walks with 5 strikeouts in 6 innings, throwing 84 pitches. The fastball averaged 94 miles an hour. Only 8 whiffs on 44 swings. Just 2 whiffs on 13 swings against the changeup. But still, he was effective. Now, the only concern that I have there is the Diamondbacks hitting 96.4 mile an hour exit velocity on 15 balls in play. MLB average is less than 90 miles an hour for exit velocity. And in Chris Paddock's start against the Diamondbacks, the average exit velocity was 96.4 miles an hour. And then Charlie Morton comes along and he pitches Sunday. And I know it was a 2-0 loss and the Phillies ended up winning that game, but Charlie Morton was excellent. 1 run on 4 hits and 1 walk with 6 strikeouts in 6 innings, throwing 84 pitches. 41-year-old Charlie Morton with a fastball that averages 95 miles an hour, a curveball that generates 5 whiffs on 15 swings. A similar concern with Charlie Morton that I have with Chris Paddock. Look at the exit velocity. The Phillies had a 91.9, so pretty much a 92 mile an hour exit velocity on 15 balls in play. Again, MLB average for exit velocity is less than 90 miles an hour. So those are my only concerns. Ball in play, they were hit hard, both against Chris Paddock and against Charlie Morton. I would expect that a little bit from the Phillies offense, maybe not so much from the Diamondbacks offense. So I'm a little bit more worried about Chris Paddock than I am about Charlie Morton moving forward. But Scott, that's the question for you, right? You got Chris Paddock, you got Charlie Morton, 2 newcomers to the rotation. Who are you more confident in among those two as the final 2 months of the season are underway? And then what do you think about those Tiger debuts?
Yeah, well, the confidence question is, that's a loaded one for sure. I think obviously the debuts were both fantastic. And yeah, it is so incredible that Morton is like, he can spin it, dude. Not only, I mean, you mentioned he's topping out at 96. I think I looked on Savant because I saw him like sitting 96 in that outing. And I was like, is he really still doing that? And he's hit 97 3 times this year. Like he can still, sling it in that regard, but he can spin the ball still, man. And there is a lot to like, obviously, with that curveball, as you mentioned. I think, man, who am I more confident in? I don't know. I think every single day it's going to be somewhat of probably a different answer. I think history would tell you that I should probably be more confident in Morton. And I think based on, what he showcased and like the stuff that he still showcased, you probably look at that and go, okay, that still kind of looks like the version of Morton that was, still one of the better pitchers in the league, 4 or 5 plus years ago. But I think the age certainly is a question. But at the end of the day, you need him to be good for like 2 months. Like you don't need this to last a full rigorous like 6-month season. You don't need this to be, multi-year contract or anything like this. It is the beginning of August and you need this to last till October. And so I think as odd as it sounds, I'm probably a little bit more confident in Morton, but at the end of the day, like these are 2 starting pitchers whose ERAs were around 5, if not higher when we acquired them. So like I need to see a lot more, but again, it's like 8 starts, 9 starts and you're through it.
You mentioned you got to get through it, right? And I think health plays into that big time. And you look at what Charlie Morton's done, and he does have the track record of staying healthy. Go back to 2017, 25 starts, 2018, 30 starts, 2019, 33 starts, 2020. That was the COVID season where we were shortened down to 60 games. He made 9 starts that year. 2021, 33 starts, 22, 31 starts, 23, 30 starts, 2024, 30 starts, right? Like this guy has been very healthy and very durable for a long stretch of time. I mean, this is like from age 33 to age 41, and Charlie Morton has not gotten hurt. Chris Paddock, on the other hand, he has now thrown 117 innings this season. That's more than he's thrown in a single season since 2019. That was his MLB debut. He's been banged up. He's had Tommy John surgery twice. So when I look at who's going to stay healthy, who can I count on down the stretch, Charlie Morton might be the guy. And then when you look at it from an effectiveness too, like Charlie Morton has a track record of being decent. Like it is like that 3.5 to 4 ERA consistently year over year. No question about it. And that's kind of been who Charlie Morton has been. Whereas Chris Paddock has been more of a 4.5 to a 5 type of an ERA guy, Charlie Morton has been more of a 3.5 to a 4. So I think my confidence lies in Charlie Morton just because the health factor, the track record, whereas Chris Paddock is a little bit more of a wild card. And again, you talk about the Diamondbacks with an average exit velocity of like 96 miles an hour against him. I know his first start was impressive, but at the same time, he was getting hit really hard. And so if those balls start to fall, things could be disastrous really quick. But let's take a look at the MLB standings update. The Tigers have a 65-48 record. They're 8 games ahead of the Cleveland Guardians for first place in the American League Central. Also 8.5 games ahead of the Kansas City Royals and 12 games ahead of the Minnesota Twins. We might no longer have to talk about the Minnesota Twins because they went on a fire sale. They have nobody left and they're now 12 games back in the AL Central. They may be falling into White Sox territory when it comes to the MLB standings update that we do here on Days of Roar. But Tigers are also tied with the Toronto Blue Jays atop the American League. They are 2.5 games ahead of the Houston Astros, 3 games ahead of the Boston Red Sox, and 4.5 games of the New York Yankees. Again, being top 2 in the American League is a huge deal because that is what guarantees you that bye into the ALDS as opposed to playing the best of 3 wildcard series. As for the best team in baseball, it's the Milwaukee Brewers at 67-44 ahead of the Chicago Cubs by 2 games, the Los Angeles Dodgers by 2.5 games, and the Tigers and the Blue Jays by 3 games. Since May 16th, the Tigers have a 36-33 record in 69 games. That's ranking 17th among the 30 MLB teams with a 7.24 OPS from the offense, tied for 3rd with a 3.47 ERA from the rotation, and 27th with a 4.99 ERA from the bullpen. So since May 16th, it's a middle of the pack offense, top of the rotation or top of the pack rotation, and bottom of the pack bullpen. That's been the 2025 Tigers since the middle of May for nearly 3 months now. Does any of that surprise you? You know, since middle of May to say, hey, this team is like middle of the pack in offense, top of the pack in rotation, bottom of the pack in bullpen, or is that pretty much what we've seen?
No, I think that is what we've seen. I think if you would have asked me in March if that would surprise me, I'd say yes on the offensive front. I didn't anticipate the offense to be even as good as it has been, despite the cold stretches it's been on. But I think, you know, we love different sample sizes, right? Like there's, okay, since this date, there was, what year was it? 2021, where it was like they were over 500 since like the beginning of May and everyone freaked out about that. Like there's always some sort of, you know, starting date with that. And I think the interesting thing with the date that you picked there is they're over 500 despite the fact that they lost 13 of 14 games at one point in July. Like if that isn't as catastrophic of a slide or a cold front as it was, and you even, and you know, slippery slope with the if game, I know, but if you even switch, you know, 2 or 3 of those to wins, you're talking about a team that again is like comfortably over 500 in that stretch as well. So I think it's good. I think obviously the big talking point over the last week was the bullpen's production and then how you're going to address it at the deadline. And then did you address enough of it at the deadline? That's obviously what everybody is talking about within the fan base currently. But no, I think the rotation's been great. Obviously tough by, in my opinion, the best pitcher in baseball. And the offense has been very, very, well, more productive than I anticipated going into the year. I'll put it that way. So yeah, if they can get their, you know, ducks in a row in the pen, then this is a team that could have a really exciting, you know, last 2 months here and obviously postseason. But I also think that is still a really big if when it comes to the bullpen.
With that being said, let's get into the big 2. Question 1 of the big 2. President of Baseball Operations Scott Harris prioritized quantity over quality. At the trade deadline, he protected his prospects. He went out and got a couple of additions for the rotation. He got some bullpen additions. But what do we think about his decisions and his moves? And just to reset the table, the Tigers acquired 8 players at the trade deadline. Starter Charlie Morton from the Baltimore Orioles. Starter Chris Paddock from the Minnesota Twins. Reliever Kyle Finnegan from the Washington Nationals, reliever Rafael Montero from the Atlanta Braves, reliever Cody Hoyer from the Texas Rangers, reliever Randy Dobnak from the Rangers, and outfielder Joseph Quinones from the Philadelphia Phillies. Only 5 of them are currently MLB players. So let's keep our focus there. Charlie Morton, Chris Paddock, Kyle Finnegan, Rafael Montero, and Paul Sewald. Although Paul Sewald isn't eligible to be activated from a right shoulder strain, which he's dealt with for pretty much the entire season until mid-September. So we will not be seeing Paul Sewald for now. The 4 players we are seeing, though, Charlie Morton, Chris Paddock, Kyle Finnegan, Rafael Montero. And then when you look at what the Tigers traded away at the trade deadline, they only traded 2 of their top 30 prospects as listed by MLB Pipeline, catcher Enrique Hernandez at number 14 and right-hander Josh Randall at number 15. So we'll get into what Scott Harris did and didn't do, but when the 6 p.m. trade deadline passed on Thursday and the Tigers had these 5 names, Charlie Morton, Chris Paddock, Kyle Finnegan, Rafael Montero, Paul Sewald, what was your reaction?
Underwhelmed. I think it's a fine line, and I kind of view it as micro versus macro, right? Like I can remember being at CMU and taking micro and macro economics, right? Like the difference between the trades in a vacuum, I really had no issue with. Like the value that was given up, as you just listed, versus the value that was brought in, I think the Tigers made out pretty fine if you're just looking at it from that regard. I don't have any of these trades that I really am rolling my eyes and I'm like, oh my goodness, we got fleeced, we lost this trade, whatever. It's the zoom out, the macro that I have a problem with, right? Like this is a bullpen that, as you just mentioned, right? It kind of desperately needs help, dare I say. Like, I don't think it's like a small little issue anymore. I think this is a team that's bullpen ERA is around 5 since the beginning of June, and they really needed help. And I don't know if they did enough to address that. So it's the value they got is fine. They didn't lose a ton. I like Enrique Jimenez, but like they have a lot of catching depth now in the Scott Harris era. I'm not really losing sleep over that at the end of the day. I think the players they got can be productive. I mean, we already saw like Finnegan had a fantastic debut. Both starting pitchers, as we just talked about, have been fantastic, right? Montero's probably still more of a wild card, but I think that there's a really solid chance that they are production, but it's almost like if I don't want them to compare it themselves to themselves. Does that sound weird? Like, yes, they're better than the bullpen pieces that they already had, but like it has been a terrible bullpen for a long time. Like that doesn't really do anything for me that the bar was raised just a little bit. Like I think the eyes probably should have been, the sights should have been set rather on a little bit higher up. And we saw, obviously, Philly's a good example. We saw Duran this weekend twice and he was incredible. So yeah, if you were asked, like you had to give up one of the top 4 prospects to get somebody of that caliber, then, that's a conversation with a little bit more nuance. And I'm not going to be maybe as upset, but like I still think there was a lot more opportunity to be aggressive than what they ended up doing.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I took away from this was they didn't even need to give up a top 100 prospect, right? One of their top 5 prospects, because the Tigers have 5 of them in their top 100. Like Scott Harris came into this trade deadline planning to be very conservative, and he was very, very conservative, I would say. Again, prioritizing quantity over quality. He wanted to preserve what is ranked as the number 1 farm system in baseball. Even a rival executive said to me, the Tigers, quote, didn't want to give up any prospect value, end quote. And the way that Scott Harris went about it was he sat down and he studied the past 10 trade deadlines. And he came up with this idea that the flashiest move fails to impact the team as much as you would have hoped or liked. Those were his words. And so then he passed on moves that were going to haunt the Tigers for many years to come because of his analysis of the last 10 trade deadlines, right? Well, again, that's the way that he went about it, right? That was his plan and he stuck to it. Well, you go look at what other World Series contenders did, right? The New York Yankees, they loaded up their bullpen, both with quality and quantity. You look at the Philadelphia Phillies, the New York Mets, they each added elite closers. Houston Astros, they go out and bring back fan favorite Carlos Correa. Toronto Blue Jays, they get a former Cy Young winner in Shane Bieber, plus multiple reliable relievers, including Sir Anthony Dominguez. So you have other World Series contenders that were going out and making moves that move the needle towards them winning the World Series. And I think to your point, with the bullpen arms that they added, did that really move the needle towards winning the World Series? Or does it just make sure that you make the playoffs? Like that's almost the way that I view it. It was like the Tigers took the conservative route of, hey, let's guarantee that we make the playoffs. Let's make sure that we don't blow what was a 9-game lead in the American League Central at the time of the trade deadline. Let's just make sure that we play it safe and get into the playoffs. As opposed to, hey, let's go win a World Series. Let's go raise a banner for the first time since 1984. Let's make that happen. That's our priority. That's our goal. Scott Harris, in his post-trade press conference, did not mention the word World Series once. AJ Hinch, the first thing that he said on Friday in the pregame, in his first answer about his reaction to the trade deadline, he mentioned the goal of winning the World Series. Scott Harris, though, in 30 minutes talking to reporters, never once said the word World Series. And that's a little bit concerning to me because that needs to be the goal every single year. I'm not saying that the Tigers needed to go out and give up, 2 top 100 prospects for Johan Duran like the Phillies did to go get him from the Twins. I'm not saying that the Tigers had to part ways with Kevin McGonigal to go get Mason Miller, which is essentially what the San Diego Padres did when they got Mason Miller from the Athletics, was they gave up the number 2 prospect in baseball. Like, I'm not saying the Tigers had to go out and get Johan Duran or Mason Miller, but those are the only top 100 prospects moved at the deadline. It was the 2 in the Duran trade, and it was the 1 in the Mason Miller trade. Those are the only top 100 prospects. So the Tigers could have gotten better pieces without having to give up Kevin McGonigal, Max Clark, Bryce Rayner, Jose Briseño, Thyron Lorenzo. You can hold on to all those guys, and you can keep them real close to the vest, and you could have still made upgrades. Instead of Kyle Finnegan, you could have went out and you could have gotten David Bednar. Instead of Rafael Montero, you could have gone out and gotten Ryan Helsley. Instead of Charlie Morton, you could have went out and gotten Merrill Kelly. You could have gotten Eugenio Suarez. Go look at the Tigers, what they're doing at third base. I mean, they are one of the worst teams in baseball at offensive production from the third base position. And part of that is because, yes, Jace Young was here, and struggling Andy Ibanez was here for quite some time. And Zach McKinstry moves around the diamond. But at the same time, when you look at their production at the third base position, it's no good. And Eugenio Suarez would have solved that problem. So they didn't make that move. They didn't go get Merrill Kelly. They didn't get Ryan Helsley. They didn't get David Bednar. And instead, it seemed like they settled for what were just these lower tier type names in trades that they won, right? You don't lose the Charlie Morton trade. You don't lose the Kyle Finnegan trade. You don't lose the Rafael Montero trade. Like, these are trades that you don't lose, but how much do you really gain? How much do you really win from these trades? Whereas I think you go out and you get Ryan Helsley. He's a free agent after 2025. You get David Bednar. He's a free agent after 2026. You get Merrill Kelly. He's a free agent after 2025. There's not a lot on the books for these guys, but you can go out and you can win now with them. And you can win the World Series with these names. Whereas it seems like the guys the Tigers picked up, it was more of just placeholders to get them to the end of the season. And I don't know that was the best way to go about it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think there is an opinion there of like, okay, we want sustainability and we want to hold on to our prospects because it's like, okay, there are, unless prospect lists have like changed. There's 30 players in your top prospects, which front offices don't care about, but like, let's just pretend they do. There's 30 in top prospect rankings.
I'll push back on that because Scott Harris likes to talk about top prospects and lists and where they're ranked and all that kind of stuff. So maybe some of them do.
Fair enough. But I think that there is 30 in pipelines, like top organizational prospects. There's 26 players on the roster. And you're hoping that a decent amount of those that are already here are here like for the long haul, right? Retaining talent. That was like one of the big talking points of the opening press conference. So unless my math has gotten significantly worse, not all of these guys in the top 30 are going to be long-term pieces for your major league team anyway. It is your job to figure out, who is here for the long haul, who is going to be one of those foundational pieces, and who are the players that are not and that we can use in situations like this. The retaining and like clutching the pearls and not letting go of any of these guys ever is honestly like preposterous to me. Like I think it is wild to prioritize, like, if McGonigal turns out and then Colt Keith, who you extended, turns out, and then like Torkelson keeps, where is Max Anderson going to play anyway, dude? Like, where, you know what I mean?
Well, that's the point that I'm making too, right? Is like, you go look at the Ryan Helsley trade, right? And you have the New York Mets giving up 3 of their prospects, right? They give up an infielder, Jesus Baez, number 8 prospect in their farm system, right-hander Nate Dom, number 14 prospect, and then an unranked prospect as well on top of that. So 3 prospects going from the Mets to the St. Louis Cardinals for Ryan Helsley. And I don't like to compare top 30 for top 30 because everyone's top 30 is different. Some teams have stronger farm systems than others. But at the same time, like, if you're looking at an infielder and a right-hander as the 2 top prospects going to the St. Louis Cardinals in the Ryan Helsley trade, maybe that is Max Anderson, an infielder, and Jaden Ham, a right-hander, right? Maybe those 2 guys would have gotten Ryan Helsley to Detroit. And now my question is, if Max Anderson doesn't pan out, and if Jaden Ham doesn't pan out, and you didn't capitalize on what value you have right now of them as prospects, is that a strike against Scott Harris? Down the road, if we find out that Max Anderson isn't worth anything and Jaden Ham isn't worth anything, can we look back on this and say that's a strike against Scott Harris?
So, I mean, I think yes. I think that that's obviously something that time will tell, but I think so. And I think on top of that, you know, one of the other counterpoints I saw like floating around out there was, oh, well, you know, none of these teams wanted anybody outside of our top 5. Well, then guess what? You don't have the best farm system in baseball, and that's not true.
That's scary. That's a scary thought if that's the case.
Is it right? Your farm system is not nearly as good as it is claimed to be if nobody wanted anybody outside of your top 5. Because to your point, you know, Eugenio Suarez went for, you know, guys that were outside of other organizations' top 5 when the Tigers are, you know, believed to be one of these best farm systems in baseball. So one of those two things has to be true. Either your farm isn't actually that good in the eyes of the rest of baseball, or this front office in its current iteration really just is going to be stingy about trading away those prospects because of what they could become.
Yeah, no top 100 prospects for Eugenio Suarez, no top 100 prospects for Ryan Helsley, no top 100 prospects for David Bednar, and no top 100 prospects for Merrill Kelly. All 3 of those players would have been upgrades. Then you look at what they did get, right? Okay, I want to talk about the players that they did acquire, and every player has major flaws. Charlie Morton's 41 years old. He has an ERA above 5. He had a 7.68 ERA in his first 12 starts. Now, since then, he has a 3.66 ERA, but let's hope he doesn't revert back to his old ways, because those first 12 starts were terrible. And Baltimore went 0-12 in the first 12 games he started. Like, that was a recipe for an L every single time he took the ball. Chris Paddock, he has an ERA above 4.5. He doesn't miss bats. He doesn't generate strikeouts. He gives up a lot of hard contact, but he does limit walks. He has a lead extension. He's got a decent changeup, but he doesn't miss bats. So there are some concerns there with Chris Paddock. And then you have Kyle Finnegan, a closer for the Nationals. He has an ERA above 4. He doesn't miss bats. He's below average in strikeouts, and he's just average when it comes to walks. But he does a decent job of keeping the ball on the ground. And I've talked about this before, right? Like, for my closer, I want someone who misses bats, limits walks, and keeps the ball on the ground. Kyle Finnegan only does one of those things. He keeps the ball on the ground, but he doesn't miss bats, and he doesn't really limit walks at an elite rate. So that's a concern. That's a concern. But again, he has 21 saves and 27 opportunities this season, and we'll see how he's used here in Detroit. And Rafael Montero is just bad. He's just bad. He has an ERA above 5. Like, when he faces a batter, there is a 14% chance that it ends in a walk. That's literally among the worst in MLB this season.
Alex Lang, for those keeping track at home. Yeah.
It is terrible. So he does generate some whiffs and he gets some strikeouts. So maybe there's some upside in that arm because the splitter's good, but he doesn't know where the ball is going. And when you can't locate it, it's just hard to get outs. Like, this is another project. It reminds me of Carlos Hernandez. It is a Carlos Hernandez-like project. And then Paul Sewald, he's injured. He's been injured for most of the season with the right shoulder strain. He was sidelined with a shoulder injury, came back for a week, and then suffered the shoulder injury yet again. So when healthy, he does things that I like. He misses bats. He racks up strikeouts. He limits walks. He does all 3 of those things. The bad news is the fastball is all the way down to 90 miles an hour now. But if his sweeper is still missing bats, then he can still be effective in high leverage situations. But he's got to get healthy, and we're not going to see him until mid-September at the earliest. So again, you say underwhelmed. I agree with you. I'm underwhelmed with what they ended up getting, but I'm a little bit more disappointed in what they didn't get, right? I think that's where I stand, right? Underwhelmed with what they got and disappointed in the fact that they didn't get more.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. I almost feel like, you know, when you're watching Moneyball for the 5,000th time and then you hear like the recreate them in the aggregate, like that's kind of what I felt like. Like, all of these guys on their own have like one trait that this organization likes, but they don't have all of them. And you're hoping like if you could put, you know, Paddock's walk rate with Montero's whiff rate, like, you have a really darn good player, but that's not how it works, right? Like, they looked at the bullpen and said, wow, we have 0 swing and miss. Let's get a cheap guy that has a lot of swing and miss. Okay, well, you know, I guess, but to your point, like, he also has a 13%, 14%, whatever it is, walk rate. So I think that there was a lot of individual pieces that they liked. And the biggest frustration really that I have is I can appreciate that this organization has taken some strides in player development and specifically pitching development. And, like we talk about Federer, London, and Nieves all the time. Like there's a lot of good happening in that regard. But just for once, maybe I would like to just acquire an actual really good player instead of we think we can turn this guy that has an ERA of 5.5 into that. Maybe one time we can just get somebody that already actually is just an established good Major League Baseball player. And I think that that's kind of where a lot of the frustration lies.
I can guarantee you AJ Hinch agrees with you on that one. All right, let's get into question 2 of the big two. Scott Harris said the Tarik Skubal window is, quote, an illusion, end quote. Is he making a mistake by not capitalizing on Skubal's current dominance? And just to refresh our listeners, we're going to have our magical producer, Robin Chan, play the audio from Scott Harris's post-trade press conference where he talks about the idea of the Tarik Skubal window to win. Everyone, here's Scott Harris.
I think this idea of a window is an illusion. I think there's a lot of talent in this organization. There are a lot of players on this team who are in it for the right reasons, who are playing for each other, and they're playing for the city of Detroit. And they've done some special things. I think from All-Star break to All-Star break, we have the most wins in all of Major League Baseball. And Tarik Skubal is certainly leading the way, and he has been leading the way here. But there's a lot of really talented players, both in the big leagues right now and that are coming through this really talented system. So, I'm not looking at this as a window. It doesn't mean that I'm shorting the present for the future by any means. But this whole idea of a window is not really filtering into my head because it's my job to get to the postseason every single year if I can. We're off to a good start. We got there last year. We have a 9-game lead in the AL Central right now, and we just got a whole lot better today. So we're going to keep chugging along. We're just keep winning as many games as we can and try to make good decisions to make sure that the city of Detroit can enjoy playoff baseball as many years as possible.
So now that we've heard from Scott Harris, I'm going to ask the question again. Are Tigers fans who believe in a Tarik Skubal window delusional? And is Scott Harris making a mistake by not capitalizing on Skubal's current dominance?
So I am at the forefront of the lines in terms of believing that there is, to an extent, a Skubal window. That is not to say that the Tigers are going to turn around and become, like last year's White Sox after he leaves or anything like that. But I do think that it is, I think I might have said this last time I was on this show, to be honest with you. I feel like it is hypocritical. I really do think it is a form of hypocrisy to not go all in and buy while he is here, while also not extending him. Doing neither of those things, I think is kind of a little bit of a slap in the face. Now, I don't want my president of baseball operations to walk out and be like, yep, after Skubal leaves, which he is, by the way, we're going to suck. Obviously, I don't want that either, but I think that it would be disingenuous to think okay, this guy that plays once every 5 days and is going to put up a 7 or 8 win season matters. Yes, obviously he is a huge reason for this team's success. And so I've been very vocal about how I think that, again, that doesn't mean that they can't compete after he leaves or anything like that. And I think that's more of the point he was probably trying to make. But in the same breath, I really think that they should be. That doesn't mean trade McGonigal either. That's my biggest frustration. There are so many steps in between, get rid of Clark, McGonigal, Briseño, and go all in. And what the Tigers actually did at the deadline this year, which was very little. I promise there are stages in between those two things. So yeah, I think there absolutely is, to an extent, a Skubal window. And I think that it is the biggest reason why is because look at the rotation long term. Look at the rotation long term and tell me who is guaranteed to be a productive major league starting pitcher for the Detroit Tigers after Tarik Skubal's team control is up.
So I ran the numbers because I wanted to fact check Scott Harris a little bit. And Scott Harris does make a good point, right? Okay, and I'll lead in with this. Since August 11th, 2024, that was when the Tigers started their winning last season, right? When they went on that crazy run from then until right now. The Tigers are 96-61. That's winning 61.1% of their games. That's MLB's best record over a 157 game span. They are 22-8 in Tarik Skubal starts. That is a 73.3% winning percentage. That is a 162 game pace of 119 wins. So if Tarik Skubal were to start 162 games in a row, Tigers would win 119 of them. But the Tigers in non-Tarik Skubal starts, they are 74-53. That is a 58.3% winning percentage in all their games. That is a 162 game pace of 94 wins. So the Tigers in Tarik Skubal starts only 119 wins. In all other games, 94 wins. So they are elite with Tarik Skubal, but they are still a 90-win team without Tarik Skubal. So I think that is maybe what Scott Harris is talking about here. But again, I don't think Scott Harris is focused on the World Series. I think he is focused on the postseason. And I think it's, hey, if we can get into the postseason year over year over year, then that's going to give us the best chance to fall into a World Series at some point, because the ball has to go your way in the postseason, right? Like there are, the teams with the best rosters don't always win the World Series, right? Why haven't the Dodgers won every single year? Well, because it's baseball, and like baseball happens. Teams get hot, teams get cold. A foul ball could change everything. A missed call from an umpire could change everything in the postseason for a certain team, right? If it happens at the right time in the right situation. So it's not about the World Series. It's about the postseason and making sure the Tigers can get in every single year and hope that maybe just one year they end up falling into winning the World Series. And I think that's where the mistake is being made, because I think the Tigers need Tarik Skubal to win the World Series. Like that's where I think Scott Harris is making the mistake by not capitalizing on Tarik Skubal, who becomes a free agent after the 2026 season. Tarik Skubal is flat out dominant. Tarik Skubal has a 2.18 ERA in 19 walks and 181 strikeouts across 140 and 2/3 innings in 22 starts this season. Since 2023, he has a 2.40 ERA and 511 strikeouts over 413 innings in 68 starts. Again, a 2.40 ERA in 68 starts in 2023. 2024 and 2025. And now to your point, where are the Tigers going to get this kind of production again from a number one starter? Like Jackson Jobe, is he going to do this in 2027 when he's back from Tommy John surgery? Is Troy Melton going to return to the rotation and do this? Or is he going to forever be stuck in the bullpen like Brant Herter? Is Jaden Ham going to suddenly change everyone's opinion about him? Newsflash, Tigers don't value Jaden Ham very highly. Definitely not as highly as they view Troy Melton. And I would bet the rest of the league doesn't love Jaden Ham either. How about injured Owen Hall or injured Ethan Schiefelbein, the second and third round picks in the 2024 draft, who just started their pro careers and have already suffered significant injuries? Maybe Joseph Montalvo, whom Scott Harris acquired from the Texas Rangers in the Andrew Chafin trade. Maybe he saves the day. But oh wait, he has a 4.50 ERA in 44 innings for AA Erie this season. So Tigers had prime Justin Verlander from 2009 to 2013, and they didn't get another version until prime Tarik Skubal in 2023 to 2025. What happened between those years? What happened between 2013 and 2023? A lot of losing. And so that's what history suggests is coming for the Tigers. And then you're right. Look ahead. 2027 rotation. Who's in it? Jackson Jobe coming back from Tommy John surgery. Reese Olson, if he could ever stay healthy. Troy Melton, if he ever makes it back from the bullpen now that he's been banished to the pen. Like, who's in that rotation? Who's in the 2027 rotation? Like Jackson Jobe and Reese Olson and Troy Melton. Are those the guys that we're going to count on? So I hate to have this conversation, but like, if the Tigers don't need Skubal, which is what Scott Harris alluded when he said the Tarik Skubal window is just an illusion, then maybe the Tigers should just trade him this offseason, get as much as they can to stock up the farm system for the Max Clark window, whenever or if ever that window opens, because maybe that's the window that Scott Harris is prioritizing, because it doesn't seem like he's prioritizing the Tarik Skubal window. So again, yes, I have a lot of issues with what he said, from when are you going to get a pitcher this dominant again, to what does the rotation actually look like when Tarik Skubal's gone in 2027, to maybe you just trade him, because if the Max Clark window is the target window for Scott Harris, because Max Clark is Scott Harris's guy and, Tarik Skubal is David Chad's guy, right? Like, I don't know. Is that the way that we're really going to play this? Because that seems a little bit foolish to me. That seems like smartest guy in the room gone wrong.
Yeah. Well, and another thing, again, when you look at the major league level right now, when are you going to have an American League this wide open ever again, dude? Like that's one of my biggest issues with not being more aggressive this year. You have Tarik Skubal still on your roster, and the American League before the deadline still is, I guess, but was literally wide open. And I think that it is it would be foolish to go into, future years and just think like, oh yeah, the Yankees with how many resources they have are just gonna, not continue to try to get better and add more pieces and whatnot. The Blue Jays just extended, Vlad long term and are planning on being competitive year over year. And we're relatively aggressive at the deadline in that regard. Like really, you can kind of just point at anybody in the AL East outside of Tampa and kind of just like make that argument and justify it. Houston never goes away, right? Like they just traded back for, Correa and always have resources at their disposal. Like I really have a hard time believing that the American League, you are going to be in this position with Tarik Skubal still on your roster and with the American League as wide open as it is, not to be too dramatic, but like maybe ever again. And so I think that is where a lot of my frustration lies for sure.
Feels like the Baltimore Orioles, and that's a concern. It feels like the Baltimore Orioles, and that worries me, especially as we get to a point where we are in a post-Tarik Skubal life, and there's no pitching. Just like the Orioles, no pitching. Look what's happened to the Orioles without any pitching. So definitely a reason to be concerned. Scott, I promise you, I know Scott Harris calls it an illusion, but I promise you, you are not delusional. Tigers fans, you are not delusional for wanting to win in the Tarik Skubal window. Not delusional at all, no matter what Scott Harris says. All right, we're going to take a break, but when we return, we're joined by Andrew Golden, the Washington Nationals beat writer. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Andrew Golden, Washington Nationals beat writer for the Washington Post, to the Days of Roar podcast for the first time. Andrew, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about the Tigers and Kyle Finnegan and everything.
Yeah, so we brought you on the show to learn more about Kyle Finnegan, whom the Tigers acquired from the Nationals at the trade deadline, giving up pitching prospects Josh Randall and RJ Sales. What should Tigers fans know about Kyle Finnegan, both on and off the field?
Yeah, I think when I look at like the Nationals rebuild and who is like maybe the Mount Rushmore of the rebuild, I think Kyle Finnegan has to kind of be one of those four guys, if not like the first guy. He might be like the George Washington of like the Mount Rushmore. Like I think he was somebody who they signed to a major league deal with a lack of major league experience. He had no big league experience. They signed to a major league deal in 2020 anyway, and he performed well and he kept, being in lower level situations early on in his career. And then they did the big sell off in 2021. And Kyle always used to joke that he was like, I went to bed the sixth inning man. I woke up the closer. And that really was how it kind of went. Like he really became like the closer just de facto because of the fact they didn't have anybody else, that he kind of grew into that role and performed well. And, he really was kind of like one of the leaders in the clubhouse, one of the leaders among the relievers. And he kind of became this is a reporter, like a guy who you can kind of go to and talk to about anything. And he's just a good guy to pick your brain. He's willing to talk about anything. He was a player rep. He was a player rep for the team at one point, for the MLBPA. So like he's kind of done a little bit of everything, but he kind of turned from a guy who nobody who really heard of into one of the best relievers in Nats history. I think he's second in saves and was really close to being number one before he got traded. And so I'm a really valuable player the Nationals really loved, and a beloved member of the team for the fan base as well.
For sure. Definitely sounds like not only a good player, but a good person as well. His journey fascinates me because this is a guy who made his MLB debut in 2020 with the Nationals, but he was already 28 years old. And actually, he was almost 29 years old when he made his MLB debut. What can you tell me about his journey, his story, where he came from, and then ultimately how he got to this point, like you said, being one of the top players in Nationals history when it comes to saves?
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty positive he was with the Oakland A's in their minor league system for the full 6 years, and then was looking for another opportunity, and then the Nationals came calling with a major league deal, and he took it. And that was a really good investment on the Nationals, and just trying to invest in a guy that really didn't have any experience, but they trusted in him, and obviously they reaped the rewards of that. And so that's kind of his journey. And he's just a guy, like I said, who's just kind of like grinded and made the most of these little opportunities, and then has gotten elevated to bigger opportunities. And he became one of the best players in the Nationals for most of his career. Had his ups and downs here and there, but he was definitely one of the most effective relievers they had for a good portion, at least my tenure on the beat. I've been covering the team since 2022, and he's been one of the most consistent guys that they've had.
So let's go back to November of 2024 when the Nationals non-tendered Kyle Finnegan. And for a reminder, every November teams have to tender or non-tender their arbitration eligible players. If tendered, the player is guaranteed a contract for the next season. If non-tendered, then the player immediately becomes a free agent. And surprisingly, the Nationals non-tendered Kyle Finnegan after the 2024 season, even though he made the All-Star team, posted a 3.68 ERA, and had 38 saves. Can you help us understand why Kyle Finnegan was non-tendered by the Nationals, and then ultimately how Kyle Finnegan then returns to the Nationals on a 1-year contract in free agency?
Yeah, I think for the biggest thing was that Kyle was an all-star last year. He was top 5 in saves. He was great. But like his peripheral numbers and his like which you looked at when you looked at a baseball savant page, or when you looked at like his secondary numbers, he was hit really hard and gave up a lot of really hard contact. And so I think the Nationals weren't willing to pay. I think he's entering his last final year of arbitration. Whatever the number was, the Nationals didn't want to pay that much for Finnegan. And so I think when it came down to it, they didn't want to tender him a contract and make him pay that much, but they were willing to sign him for a cheaper deal, which ended up happening. Obviously, Kyle went and saw the market. There are a lot of teams interested, but I think Kyle wanted to prove he continued to be a good closer and improve some of those peripheral numbers, and he did, but he signed on a smaller contract because the Nationals didn't want to spend, $7-8 million, however much it would have been, to pay him. I just don't think that he was worth, I don't think the Nationals thought that he was worth that amount of money, but they were interested in signing him back on a smaller contract, and that's what ended up happening.
Yeah, MLB Trade Rumors, looking at it now, had him projected for $8.6 million in salary arbitration, and then the Nationals end up getting him for $5.38 million. So obviously the Nationals made the right decision there in terms of non-tendering him, sending him out into free agency, but then ultimately getting him back from a value standpoint makes total sense why they did it. But again, I think from the outside looking in, it was really surprising of like, hey, this guy was an all-star, had a sub-4 ERA, he had nearly 40 saves, and suddenly he's become a free agent. But then he ultimately ends up back with the Washington Nationals. But
another thing too is he also struggled a lot in the second half, which was also part of it too. Like he started really, really hot and then kind of declined in the second half. I think that also probably played a little bit of a factor into it too.
So that's what I'm curious about. Like on the mound, we know it's fastball splitter, a little bit of slider as well. It seems like the Tigers want him to throw fewer fastballs and more splitters and sliders. So that will be maybe a change in usage that he'll see coming over from the Nationals to the Tigers. But when you watched him over the years, what did you see, and what should we expect about the way he pitches and the way that he goes about his business, pitching more often than not in the 9th inning in a safe situation?
Yeah, he threw a lot of four-seam fastballs, especially in those 9th inning games. Like you'd see him kind of pound the top of the zone with the four-seam fastball. And there'd be some games where he just get hit really hard, or like you always knew like if he was closing a game, there would probably be a little bit of like tension, and like it wouldn't always be the easiest save, but like he would get there, but it was always kind of interesting. And so I think that's what you're seeing. I was really interested when he pitched on Saturday for the Tigers, is that like you mentioned, his four-seam fastball percentage was down, but he was throwing his secondary stuff more. So I'm interested. I always thought that maybe he'd be a little bit better if he did that. So I'm interested to see how that will translate now that he's over with the Tigers, and maybe he'll have some more success because he's not predictable in terms of throwing his four-seam fastball. So I'm excited to see personally, just from being an outsider now, like how maybe that changes things for him.
And also too, his presence and his personality in the clubhouse. We got a chance to meet him for the first time when the Tigers are on the road in Philadelphia playing against the Phillies. And he was pretty quiet there in the visitors clubhouse in Philadelphia. But again, he's only been here for just a few days. So I don't want to jump to conclusions about who this guy is, but for example, right, like the Tigers went out and they signed Tommy Kahnle in free agency. And Tommy Kahnle on day one of spring training was like the loudest guy in the clubhouse. Kyle Finnegan on day one as a Tiger was not the loudest guy in the clubhouse. What should we expect from him kind of behind the scenes with the presence, the personality? I know you mentioned the MLBPA. That's really fascinating. The Tigers have Tarik Skubal, who's on the executive subcommittee. They also have Casey Mize, who's a player rep. And then I always, really appreciate guys who do that kind of stuff because they're going above and beyond for their teammates, being involved with the PA. But yeah, what's the personality like? What's the presence like? Who's the person? What should we expect from Kyle Finnegan here in the final 2 months of the season?
Yeah, I think you hear like a lead by example kind of guy a lot. I would say that's who he is. He's not going to be like the rah-rah guy who's screaming at the top of his lungs. But I do think he is a guy who will be a good teammate, will look out for his teammates, always kind of be there for advice and tips and those sort of things. I think what you probably assess is pretty accurate. Like he'll probably be pretty quiet at first, but then as time goes on, once he starts to get more comfortable, he'll probably open up more. And I think that's maybe just a product. Maybe that's how his career has gone. We're trying to find his way to fit in. But like, I think he's very confident in who he is. He just might not, like, he's not going to be the guy who's going to be very rah-rah and like screaming at the top of his lungs to do that. But I think he's a really, really good teammate. Everybody who was in the Nationals clubhouse loved him. And like that was my sense. And so I don't think that'll change. I know he and Mackenzie Gore were pretty tight. I know he and Hunter Harvey are pretty tight back when Hunter was with the Nationals. Now he's on the Royals now. So I think that's what you'll see. I think all the relievers loved him. And so I don't think anything will change now.
That's good to hear. All right, I'm going to shift gears. I had a Juan Soto question for you, which Tigers fans might be like, why is Evan asking Andrew about Juan Soto? But it's related to Tarik Skubal, who is set to become a free agent after the 2026 season. The Tigers, barring a big boost in their offer, they're not going to be able to extend or re-sign Tarik Skubal. So unless something changes, I wonder, would it be smart for the Tigers to trade Tarik Skubal? Now, when the Nationals traded Juan Soto to the San Diego Padres, Soto had 3 postseason runs remaining before free agency. He had 2022, 2023, in 2024. After this season, Tarik Skubal will have only one postseason run remaining before free agency. That's 2026. So the situation isn't exactly the same, and the Tigers won't be able to get back as much for Skubal as the Nationals got for Soto. The Nationals got something instead of nothing for Juan Soto, their superstar. And the Tigers, assuming they can't keep him, could choose to get something instead of nothing for Tarik Skubal, their superstar. So my question is, do you think the Nationals made the right decision by trading Juan Soto? And how has that trade and the pieces that they got back impacted the franchise?
Yeah, I think they made the right decision. I know it was pretty frowned upon at the time, or at least in terms of the fan base reaction to it. Obviously, Juan Soto was this young player who had meant so much to the World Series run. It was a very tough thing, but I think at the time it made a lot of sense. I think when you looked at where their farm system was at the time and where they were trending, like, they weren't going to be competitive during the Soto era if he had stayed because of how lacking their farm system was. And so I think the trade kind of revitalized their farm system and really helped them to add pieces who could contribute both at the minor league and the major league level. And like, it's very rare for a trade to work out as well as that did, but it really has in the sense of McKenzie being a frontline, top of the rotation ace, CJ Abrams just being a really solid contributor offensively, James Wood being, and I know he's struggling right now, but James Wood being like one of the next superstar players. I mean, like, I'm not saying you got Juan Soto back in return, but like, he's that type of player. And then you obviously had two solid pieces in Robert Hassel, who's kind of been up and down this year, but he made his debut earlier this month. And then Harlan Susan is throwing 100 in Double-A right now. And so I think when you look at that trade, like, there are a lot of benefits to making a trade like that. In terms of maybe why we haven't seen the success, I think it's also a matter of, does ownership invest in adding to the roster around the young core that they have? And do they invest in the minor league system too? I think when you look at the Nationals player development, part of the problem is that, like, even though they got those players in return, they have not done a great job of developing other hitters around them. And so it's like, when you look at their roster, it's like, could they have the potential to be really good if they added and spent more money? Yes. But could they also done a better job if they had developed better players who could help build around them? Yes. And I don't think they've done that or maximize that per se. They've had some contributors, but nobody who's been like elite who's taken them over the top. And so I think that, like, in the sense of, do the Tigers trade Skubal, I think it's a question, number one, of like, where are they at? Like, right now, the Tigers are one of the best teams in baseball right now, and they're competing. And so there's an argument to make that, like, if you could compete and you keep the guy because you could win a World Series, right? And so I think there's obviously that value on one end, but obviously if for some reason I think they can't compete next year and they need to try to maximize his value, I think there is value to potentially trading him. But if they think they can compete, then I think they should keep him and go all in. But, you know, with the Nationals at the time, like, they weren't going to be competitive for a while, just given where their roster was.
I really do think that the Tarik Skubal situation maybe more directly correlates to the Milwaukee Brewers and Corbin Burns, when the Brewers still planning to compete, still hoping to compete, and then after trading him, still competing. Like, they were still a good team, but they traded him to the Baltimore Orioles, got DL Hall back and Joey Ortiz. But that was a team in the Brewers that, I mean, they were still willing to compete, but they figured they could trade away their guy who they weren't going to be able to keep, you know, beyond the 2024 season. And that's what they did by shipping him off to the Orioles. We'll see if the Tigers make a similar move with Tarik Skubal this offseason, even though, yes, they still plan to compete next year. But if you can't re-sign him, if you can't keep him, maybe you get something for him. But it's been really interesting how things have worked out so well for the Washington Nationals. And it makes me wonder, how far away are the Nationals from being postseason contenders again? Because they have so many young players who are up right now. They've got a few more, like you mentioned, knocking on the door. And it seems like, you know, you invest a few more dollars in that team and this could be a postseason team soon.
Yeah, I don't think they'll be competitive next year. Just looking at where they are, they won 71 games each of the last two seasons, but this year's kind of been a step back. I don't know how you make up enough wins to get back to being a playoff team, but I think like maybe 27, 28, maybe you're hoping they can be more competitive by then, but then obviously it becomes a question of who is still on the roster, because at that point, by 2027, Mackenzie Gore is probably at the end of his time. CJ Abrams is nearing it too. And so I think it's a matter of, if the ownership is willing to spend money, which I don't get the sense that they will, just based off what they've shown the past couple of years, at least in my time covering the team. If they're not willing to invest and spend the money, then I don't really know how they're going to be competitive unless they develop guys internally. And so I guess for me, like, I don't see them being competitive next year, but I think down the line, maybe if they're able to develop a little bit better and sign some guys, and maybe things change around. But I just don't look at the roster at the current moment and think that they're ready to compete unless they really add significantly to their roster this offseason.
All right, last thing, going back to Kyle Finnegan, the Tigers are tied with the Toronto Blue Jays for the best record in the American League, and fans are hoping for the first World Series title since 1984. Should we feel confident in Kyle Finnegan pitching in the biggest moments in the World Series if the Tigers get that far, or is that a red flag?
No, I think you can count on him. Like, again, as I mentioned before earlier in the podcast, like it can be rocky. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it can be a little rocky, but I do think you can count on him in those moments. He's done it before. I think obviously the playoffs are different animals, so I can't speak to that. Obviously everything is different in the playoffs, but I do think he's shown in his past that he can handle those big high leverage situations. And I think that, him getting into a closer role, or being the sixth man guy is proof that he can do that. And so I think if it came down to it, he could. I'm sure the Tigers have a lot of better options too, but I think that he would be in that mix for a guy that you can count on in those late inning games.
All right, Andrew. Thank you for joining the Days of Our podcast to introduce us to Kyle Finnegan, the newest high leverage reliever for the Tigers.
Thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Everyone, that was Andrew Golden, the Washington Nationals beat writer for the Washington Post. We have more to discuss this week about the Tigers, but first, let's take a break. All right, we are back. Thank you again to Andrew Golden for giving us a little bit of insight into new Tigers reliever Kyle Finnegan and how the Juan Soto trade has impacted the Washington Nationals moving into the future. All right, Scott, let's talk about this bullpen. We just talked about Kyle Finnegan with Andrew Golden, the Nationals beat writer. So let's dig into the high leverage moments of the game, right? Biggest situation. Who do you trust the most at this point? Because the Tigers, they look at their bullpen and they say, hey, look, we have three guys that we consider high leverage relievers. Kyle Finnegan, Will Vest, and Tommy Kahnle. And maybe Tyler Holton too, but he's more of a Swiss Army knife in the way they use him. Of those three names, or others, if you'd like to name others, maybe you were a Rafael Montero believer. Who do you trust the most in the biggest moment of the game? Kyle Finnegan, Will Vest, or Tommy Kahnle, or someone else?
Well, I'll tell you right now who it's not. It's not Tommy Kahnle. I think that ship has kind of sailed. At one point, you might have been able to convince me back in, late May. But yeah, that is, even in his mop-up duties lately, he's given up, like a solo home run or been hit really hard. So it's not Kahnle. And honestly, like, we didn't see him much this weekend. And I think that's probably telling, considering how every single one of these ball games that were just played against a good team were close, and yet Tommy Kahnle was barely on the mound. So I don't, not him. I think, honestly, like, how is it not Finnegan? Like, Will Vest obviously had a rough weekend. I think that, if you just look at what was right in front of our eyes, like, it feels like AJ probably is going to go to him in those, save situations, or in that, high leverage ninth inning situation, if you will. And yeah, like, Vest, obviously, I still trust. Obviously this weekend wasn't great, and both of his outings were pretty rough, but I think he's probably solidified himself as the number two, if you will. But it is, I think, again, like, not to retread, but that's probably part of the frustration. Like, yes, Finnegan is maybe one of the better relievers in your bullpen immediately. That's great. I think there's probably an underlying issue with a guy with a 4.3 ERA with no swing and miss is immediately your best reliever. I think that probably screams to the bullpen not being very talented. So, like, I think both of those things can be true at the same time.
So I'm a big Will Vest believer at this point. And so I'm going to go Will Vest on this one just because of what he's done in the track record. It's a 2.85 ERA. He's above average in walk rate, strikeout rate, and whiff rate, and he's elite in ground ball rate. 16 saves and 21 chances. One of the best fastballs in baseball, more so last year than this year. And yes, he has had some rocky outings recently, but I do think that he is the best pitcher the Tigers have in their bullpen. And I hope the Tigers continue to trust Will Vest in the biggest moments. But when I asked AJ Hinch about Kyle Finnegan and what his role is going to be on this team moving forward, AJ Hinch said, Kyle Finnegan could pitch at any time, any moment in the game. Like, he's kind of joined what the Tigers do with their bullpen. There is no set closer, which is why Kenley Jansen was never a fit here, because Kenley Jansen demands to pitch in save situations, right? The Tigers, that's not how they operate. That's not how AJ Hinch runs his bullpen, at least right now. Now, by the way, I want to make something very, very clear. If you give AJ Hinch Johan Duran, he will pitch Johan Duran in safe situations every single time. I just want to make that super clear. Like, AJ Hinch, yes, he's really good at the mix and match. Yes, he's really good at the plug and play with the lineup, but that's not what AJ Hinch wants. I want to make that super clear. Like, AJ Hinch isn't like, oh yes, like, give me all the projects I can get and like, I'll get the most out of them. Like, no, like, you think AJ Hinch didn't love his lineup that he had in Houston? Like, seriously, you didn't think he loved that lineup in Houston? Like, you didn't think he liked penciling Jose Altuve in there every day? Like, come on now. So AJ Hinch, and same thing with the bullpen too, right? Like, you give AJ Hinch, Griffin Jax, and Johan Duran, like, he is going to put those guys in the 8th and the 9th inning, back to back, game in, game out, no question about it. So I want to make that super clear. But AJ Hinch is really good at mixing and matching and also getting guys to buy into the team plan, which is what he got Kyle Finnegan to do, which is why when we talked to Kyle Finnegan for the first time, he said, I'll pitch anywhere from the 5th inning to the 9th inning. Whenever they call my name, I'll be ready to go. And I do respect that. I respect that everybody in that bullpen is on board at pitching at any time. But to get back to the original point, AJ Hinch did say, we will use Kyle Finnegan in the most important moment of the game. That's the way that he described Kyle Finnegan's role. So I think you're right in terms of that's how they're going to use him. I just don't know if that's best for the Tigers when you look at what Will Vest does. I mean, again, above average in walk rate, above average in strikeout rate, above average in whiff rate, elite in ground ball rate. You go compare the baseball savant pages of Will Vest and Kyle Finnegan, and it is really red for Will Vest. It's not so red for Kyle Finnegan. Like, there are a lot of things that you can nitpick when it comes to Finnegan that you just can't with Will Vest. So I hope the Tigers continue to trust in Will Vest. I think Kyle Finnegan, yes, he has been good in save situations, but at the same time, it's just a lot of ball and play. And I don't like ball and play. I don't like it. It scares the crap out of me. It's why I was worried about the Tigers bullpen in the playoffs last year. It was the biggest concern that I had about them in the playoffs. And yes, they did a really good job of throwing change-ups and sinkers, and they suppressed BABIP by getting ground balls, right? So ball and play maybe wasn't as big of a deal because it was a lot of ground balls. But at the same time, ball and play will come back to bite you eventually. And I like the fact that Will Vest, yes, it's a lot of ground balls, but at the same time, he misses a lot of bats too. He's probably the top bat misser in the Tigers bullpen among the guys that they can rely on. You talk about Will Vest, Kyle Finnegan, Tommy Kahnle. Who do you trust the most to miss a bat? It's got to be Will Vest, which is why I like him in that situation. But I could certainly see it going both ways. But all right, to pivot to Reese Olson, suffered a right shoulder injury 2 seasons in a row now with a right shoulder injury. Can the Tigers count on him moving forward? Because he pitched in 31 games in 2023 between AAA Toledo and the Tigers, throwing more than 140 innings. Since then, 22 starts for the Tigers in 2024, and now just 13 starts for the Tigers in 2025, limited to a total of 181 innings in the last 2 seasons, about 112 innings in 2024, and about 69 innings in 2025. Are we still confident in Reese Olson being a number 2 or number 3 starter for the Tigers in 2026? And are we confident he can even stay healthy for the entire 2026 season at this point?
Yeah, well, I think health is really the only question. I mean, when he's been on the bump, he's been fantastic. He had a sub-3 for most of the year this year. The stuff is so great, and the improvements, slight improvements with the fastball have been really noticeable. Like, there's a lot to like with Reese Olson. I think, yeah, it's just like, can he stay on the field? Which I couldn't tell you. Like, the fact that it's not like he's going out there and one day it's, a hamstring and the next it's a back and then it's, his ring finger or whatever it was. And then like it's 2 years in a row of shoulder specific injuries. And I think that is certainly a red flag. Now, does that mean that there's really anything that the Tigers can do about that in terms of Reese Olson in a vacuum and how they handle him? Like, I guess you could like flip him, but other teams have injury reports too. I'm not sure that's going to do you much good. Okay, well then you just try to work with what you have. You believe in the ceiling, which is, a top half of the rotation guy, and you try to keep him on the field and do whatever you can to make sure that happens. But I don't have confidence. Now, in the same breath, like, I didn't have confidence that Tarik Skubal was going to play a full season until last year either. Like, going into he had even come really close to that until a year ago. So, like, once it happens, it happens. And then it's just like kind of behind you and people don't talk about it as much anymore. But until it happens, you're kind of just sitting around waiting for it to.
So looking ahead to 2026, you have Tarik Skubal, Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize. And then what? Reese Olson, Troy Melton, Slayer Gibson-Long, Cater Montero, maybe a Zach Gallen to fix as a free agent, similar to what the Tigers did with Michael Lorenzen and Jack Flaherty. Or maybe you do that and you go big by signing Dylan Cease, especially if you decide to trade Tarik Skubal. But all that to come. One of those names, Troy Melton, has moved to the bullpen. Curious, what did we learn about Troy Melton in his first 2 starts? And what should we expect from him out of the bullpen? And when I look at Troy Melton, I say the stuff is real. Like, the fastball velocity is legit. The slider is a weapon. And then he still has the sinker, cutter, curveball, and splitter that he throws at you. And he throws strikes. and he limits walks. When I look at Troy Melton, I say this guy has all the makings of a number 3 starter. And maybe even beyond that, if he's able to really hone in on all of the skills that he has. So I hope the Tigers don't keep him stuck in the bullpen like they did with Brant Hurter. Like, I feel like Brant Hurter could have been more as a pitcher. Like, Brant Hurter's great as a reliever, but I feel like there's a world in which Brant Hurter could have been more. But he's been banished to the bullpen for the past 2 seasons, and I just hope the same doesn't happen with Troy Melton. If he shows out and he shows as a really good reliever down the stretch here into the postseason, I hope the Tigers don't say, yep, case closed on Troy Melton ever starting again. He works really good out of the bullpen. We can use him in a Swiss Army knife. You know, we can use him for 1 inning. We can use him for 4 innings, just like they do with Brant Hurter. I hope that doesn't happen to Troy Melton, because I do think the upside is really high for him as a starter. But my big concern with Troy Melton, and it's similar to my concerns with Chris Paddock and Charlie Morton, in 2 starts, MLB hitters have a 95.1 mile an hour exit velocity against him. And in AAA Toledo, hitters had a 93.6 mile an hour average exit velocity against him. So 95 mile an hour average exit velocity in the big leagues, 94 mile an hour average exit velocity in AAA Toledo. The AAA average is like 88, 89 for exit velocity. And the MLB average is like 89, 90 for average exit velocity. Troy Melton is way above average in exit velocity for opposing hitters. So he's getting hit extremely hard when hitters do make contact, both at the AAA and MLB levels. That is something to monitor moving forward for me. But again, I love the stuff. I like the pitcher. I think the future is bright. But when he gets hit extremely hard. That's my one big concern. But I like Troy Melton. I think he has a bright future.
Yeah, I absolutely love Troy Melton. And I think that the mindset of this front office at the deadline was, okay, we're seeing the price tag for really good relievers. We don't want to pay that. So we are going to bring in a starting pitcher and then have a 2-for-1 scenario where then we're not only are we bringing in a starting pitcher, but then Melton is going to go to our bullpen and be a flamethrower out of the pen and be like, look, we're going to bring in a starting pitcher and help our bullpen too. And I think that's ridiculous. I think that he is more valuable as a starter once every 5 days. I think that he is, to your point, like has the ceiling of legitimately being a top half of the rotation guy. I think there's a little bit of stuff with like pitch mix and just keeping people off of his fastball. Like, yes, it goes 98, 99, but major league hitters, if they hit time up 98, 99, can hit the ball, to your point, really hard. So I think that that's probably something I want to see in development. And I think, you know, in the first 2 outings, we kind of saw both sides of that coin, right? Like we saw when he has the timing of the hitter thrown off, he is in control, man. He had a presence on the mound that like he was in complete control that entire outing, where in the first outing, it was the opposite. And that was because, you know, there wasn't as much of that. And there was a little bit of command stuff, you know, out of his zone with that too. But I think that he should be developed as a starter until proven otherwise. That doesn't mean that he won't necessarily be a reliever long term. Like, time will tell. But the ceiling of what he could be as a starting pitcher is far too high for me to just pull the plug on. And I think it is, I don't know if hypocritical is too like dramatic of a word, but to be so like keen on, we care about development and we care about, you know, retaining these really good young players. But then also when we have a really good young player at the major league level, we're not going to put him in the best situation to develop when we're going to relegate him to the bullpen. I think that's a little bit, you know, not exactly the practice that was being preached, you know, the sentence before that quote. So I don't know. We'll see. But I think he'll be great there. Yeah, like the bullpen finally has someone that can throw 100 like that. You know, the Rockies have one of those. Like every team in baseball has one of those except for Detroit for some reason. So like that's nice. But I think long term, I would absolutely love to see him developed as a starter.
I hope so as well. And I understand with the innings limit and stuff like that, maybe they want to get into the bullpen to protect his arm. I totally understand. But they're planning to use him as the right-handed version of Brant Hurter. So the way that Brant Hurter is used, imagine a right-handed version, and that's going to be exactly what Troy Melton is going to do. It could be 1 inning, it could be 4 innings, it could be 3 innings, it could be 2 innings, it could be anything in between 1 and 4, or maybe 5 innings out of the pen if they need him to stretch out and go 5 innings if a starter isn't able to make it. But that worries me long term because I don't want him to fall into that same Brant Hurter category, because I would like to see Brant Hurter developed as a starter too. I think Brant Hurter has a lot of potential as a pitcher, and I would like to see him developed as a starter. So hopefully that same thing happens to Troy Melton as well. But yeah, Hunter out of the pen, I'm not going to complain about that, especially in the postseason. Talk about Brendan Hanifee. Did Brendan Hanifee deserve to be demoted to AAA Toledo? And who would you rather have? Rafael Montero or Brendan Hanifee? Luke Jackson or Brendan Hanifee? Like, I think the Tigers did Brendan Hanifee dirty here. And AJ Hinch kind of said as much. Here's what AJ Hinch said. Quote, "It's a little bit of a tough luck scenario with him. We had to make a move. If you look at the configuration of our bullpen, there are very few guys that have options," end quote. So the Tigers optioned Brendan Hanifee to AAA Toledo, and they're keeping Rafael Montero, who has no options, and they're keeping Luke Jackson, who has no options. Is that okay?
Well, it's not the first time that we've been preached that. I'll say that much. I mean, I can remember when Joey Wentz was sticking around and people were like, why the heck? And it was like, well, he's out of options. And, like they want to at least give themselves a chance to quote unquote fix him on the mound. And so I think that, I would rather have Hanifee than Jackson for sure. I think it's probably fair to say Montero as well, although we'll see him he hasn't pitched yet in a Tigers uniform. But maybe that's all you need, right? Hanifee pitched every night, it felt like, and Montero's been here for a weekend and hasn't even stepped on the bump yet. So I think that AJ probably is a little bit, frustrated, not to speak for him, but it sounds like with that quote as well, that's probably a guy that in a perfect world he would have kept around. But when you sign Jackson to a major league contract for the rest of the season, and then you make these kind of low end trades, these floor raising trades rather than ceiling raising trades, you put yourself in a situation where you have to move a guy that has a sub-3 ERA down to the minor leagues. And he's got that sinker that AJ loves him as first out of the pen, right? You see Hanifee in the 5th, 6th, 7th inning all the time. I mean, to perfectly put a bow on it, really, Hanifee pitched high leverage 8th inning of a 1-run or tied ball game or whatever on Friday.
Yes, it was a string of right-handed hitters, and that's what Brendan Hanifee's great at. And you're going to face more right-handed hitters than left-handed hitters. So come on now.
Right, exactly. And that the sinker inside to righties, as we all know, that's his bread and butter. That's what makes him so difficult against them. And that's what AJ loves about him. And I think that it's really telling that a guy that pitched in one of the highest leverage situations of the game on Friday was optioned on Sunday, and it wasn't because of performance. He has a sub-3 on the season. So yeah, I think that it's probably fair to say that he kind of got the short end of the stick there. But, at the same time, this is the bed you made, and you kind of have to lay in it from a front office perspective.
Yeah, this one fires me up a little bit just because, again, you look at what Brendan Hanifee's done, and it's a 3.10 ERA in 46 relief appearances. The Tigers actually named him as one of their 2 relievers of the month for July, and then they optioned him to AAA Toledo on August 2nd. So he was their reliever of their month for July, and then he gets optioned on August 2nd. And beyond that, he hadn't allowed a run in 10 2/3 innings before Friday's game when he allowed 2 runs. He made the crucial error that led to the game-winning run, and then he gets options. I'm telling you, Brendan Hanifee did not deserve to be sent down. When you prioritize Rafael Montero and Luke Jackson over Brendan Hanifee, I just can't imagine it. I don't want to put words in his mouth either, but I can't imagine that sits right with AJ Hinch. And I can't imagine that sits right with the other relievers in the bullpen. And that's on Scott Harris, who loves his projects. Maybe there's a 10% chance that Luke Jackson works out, and maybe there's a 5% chance that Rafael Montero works out. But at what cost? There's a chance that he just pissed off the manager and the relievers in that bullpen by sending out Brendan Hanifee, who has a better ERA than Kyle Finnegan, Tyler Holton, Troy Melton, Tommy Kahnle, Luke Jackson, and Rafael Montero. Only Will Vest and Brant Herter have better ERAs than Brendan Hanifee. And Brendan Hanifee had a specific role that AJ Hinch liked to use him in on this team. And now he's in Toledo. Now he's a Mudhead. So maybe I'm getting too worked up, but that roster move really bothered me. And I would not be surprised, and I'm just guessing here, but I would not be surprised if it upset some people internally as well. Because I don't think Brendan Hanifee deserved to be optioned. And we'll see what this bullpen looks like without him now. When there is a string of right-handed hitters and they need someone to get a ground ball, who are they going to go to? Who are we going to go to? I guess time will tell. All right, coming up this week, the Tigers have 3 games against the fire sale Minnesota Twins at Comerica Park, and then 3 games against the still believing Los Angeles Angels at Comerica Park. For the Twins series, we'll see Casey Mize on Monday, Chris Paddock on Tuesday, and Jack Flaherty on Wednesday. Normally, I would be concerned with those three starting pitchers going, but the Twins are a really bad team right now, and I'm not concerned at all. For the Angels series, it's lined up to be Tarik Skubal on Friday, Charlie Morton on Saturday, and Casey Mize on Sunday. The Angels have a 37-33 record in their last 70 games, so do not sleep on them. And Mike Trout is healthy. It's always good for the game when Mike Trout is on the field. Scott Bentley, we have 3 games against the Twins coming up, 3 games against the Angels. Is there anything that you're looking forward to about these 6 games on the homestand?
Winning. Like, yeah, that should be above all else, dude. Like that should be all that matters this week. This is like the deadline is behind you. Whatever happened. Look at, I mean, I don't want to go on a side tangent. I know we got to get out of here soon, but like, look at the whole month of August, brother. They don't play anybody. They play Houston, and then the second best team they play the entire month of August is the Royals, who are sub 500 as we record this. Like their August is an absolute treat and should give you the opportunity to kind of mix and match with the bullpen and figure out who we trust and who we don't trust. Should be an opportunity to expand that division lead even wider and kind of, ensure that there isn't going to be some whatever, like, post deadline collapse or whatnot. Like, you have an opportunity to, I'm going to say, I guess, run away with it already more than you have here going forward. There should be no other, what are you looking forward to other than winning every single time you go out there? Because again, outside of 1 3-game set in Houston, you don't play nearly anybody over 500.
Could not have said it better myself. All right, it's time to get out of here. Thanks to Scott Bentley for co-hosting with me this week. And thanks to everyone out there for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Drop us a rating and comment what you think about the show. Stick with freep.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, sports editor Bill Bradley, and our producer, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.